As we approach the third decade of this century, one can often wonder how we've got to where we are today, how we've arrived at what we know and what we think we know, our various beliefs and ideologies, our norms and understandings, our scientific discoveries and religious convictions. How have they reached us, and what place do they have in what is now such a rapidly changing world, where advancements in science and technology have opened more and more doors of possibilities, with information and communication shared on a truly global scale. In this vein, one can argue that we've seen more changes in the last 20 years than in the previous 50 or even 100 years prior, particularly here in the West, where change is faster and more prominent, where it's not just a matter of technology and commerce, but a changing mindset and worldview, where capitalism and secularism have bred an increasingly individualistic society, one that is underpinned by an overarching atheistic worldview, where there is no time for a higher purpose. No, instead, consumerism and instant gratification have become the focus. The survival of the fittest, the rat race, keeping up with the Joneses, where the worship of the self has replaced everything else, where incomplete theories and speculations have been adopted as gospel, spawning an ideology that goes beyond even the most ardent atheists in the scientific community. People who have devoted their lives to the scientific method, who themselves remain open to changing their minds if or when the evidence reveals itself. The same cannot be said about the godless direction society is heading in. As theists, are we aware what is happening? Have we taken the time to reflect on the culture, the pressures and the characteristics of our changing society? Make no mistake, the scientific method has brought about some of the greatest advancements in all spheres of life. It has kept us healthy. It has allowed us to prosper, to even reach the moon and back. There is no mistake, but have we thought to consider how society has taken these advancements to breed a dogma, an ideology that takes this method beyond its scope, where the direction of travel is one where religious congregations are slowly dying out, where the youth struggle to engage, where priorities are wholly materialistic, where God is mocked and lampooned, even hated, where the idea of intelligent design is cause for ridicule, even though there is no evidence-based alternative. This is the society we live in. It's very different to just a few decades ago, or the one that our parents grew up in. And therein lies the focus of this documentary. This isn't some kind of rebuttal or debate against the atheistic direction of society. No, it's the beginning of a conversation we should all be having, something we should be reflecting on, together and in our own time alone, where we really take stock of the environment we live in, with an effort to recognize the drip-drip effect of the growing atheistic society that we find ourselves living in.
There's no doubt in my mind that England is, for example, as a country, it would be a stretch to call it a Christian country now. In my meeting with regular people, when I ask them, are you Christian? They will say, yeah, I guess. There's no conviction there. And then when you ask them, what does that mean to you? You find that it's just a word, it's not a strong allegiance. I've spoken to rabbis, I've spoken to, Christian priests, as well as, our own community of Muslims. Everybody's complaining of the same thing, that the mosques, the churches, in fact, the churches and the synagogues more really than the mosques, are full of people who are old and elderly, or, it's interesting enough, people who have moved from countries where religious tradition is very strong. But when it comes to people who have lived in the Westness for a long time, there is this atheism that is the more common phenomenon found in society. So all that is rubbing off on the youth, because at the end of the day, we do not protect our kids in an enclave. They're out there, they're in uni, they meet people, and they see how people are living. If Islam is perceived as some sort of prison, then they feel that they're trapped and the other guys are free. And every so often, people will move to that direction and say, you know what, I can't do this.
the people from Muslim background is a very interesting one, because like people from another sort of what I would call a sort of strong religious background, like a Catholic background, what I've noticed, and this is completely non-scientific sampling, is just people I know, people who were formerly Catholics, which is quite a strong religion. It's very big on guilt and on duty and all those things, and they feel they've had to escape that, and so they become quite anti-religious.
Yes, an unfortunate phenomenon is that people are leaving their faith, but that also needs to be analyzed a little bit. Again, people becoming disenchanted, confused about their faith, or becoming lukewarm in their loyalty to their beliefs is not a new phenomenon. It happens, it has happened for a long time. What has changed is that we are more aware of these things because of social media, because they have streams by which they can actually portray their experiences. They can write blogs, they can go online and so on, and more people become aware of this. Additionally, there are specific websites that encourage people to think about their religion and ask them some difficult questions.
The big change is the decline in the people who identify with the Church of England. That's the big change. And there are probably two reasons for that, I think. One is that people think for themselves and they think, well, I just don't believe this anymore. But the other reason is a social reason, that 30 years ago it was more socially difficult to say, that you were certainly atheistic or you were not religious. If somebody says, what are you? What's your belief? People say, oh, I suppose I'm Church of England. That was just socially what you did. Whether they actually went to a service or believed in any of it, that was beside the point. So it's become more socially acceptable now. So those two things are driving it. And now about 50% of the population doesn't identify as being religious.
There is a saying, what you see in society, you will ultimately see in the community. This change in what is socially acceptable, along with the myriad of views and opinions, has meant that the decline in religiosity is now very much a part of the Muslim community also. Muslims of various persuasions are openly leaving Islam. Of course, there are no set reasons as to why, but the point here is that this is happening. As parents, as teachers, as leaders of the community, are we aware that this is happening? What are mosques and Islamic centers doing to address these trends?
My family came from Kashmir. They're all Muslims. I grew up in this country. By the time I was a teenager, I started to have some suspicions about what I was being told in the mosque and at home and with my community. I generally was reading books anyway, and I realized that there's a lot more viewpoints out there than what I'm aware of right now. So I kind of got curious, and I said I wanted to find out the answers to the questions, the big questions about reality, where does the world come from, whether there's a God or not, what's the right way to behave, how to govern society. I really wanted to know the answers to these questions. So I went to university and I did philosophy, and that was a good introduction in how to go about answering these questions. For about 10 years I was quite infatuated with philosophy. However, I came to a bit of a wall, and I realized that philosophy can only help you so much. In terms of abstract thinking, it's all fair and well. However, we live in a real physical world. We need to find out answers about what's going on here. So there's a branch of philosophy which I was interested in, and that was the scientific method. It started with empiricism, but it's a lot more than that. I realized that all the answers in philosophy that we are limited to answer is simply because of the scientific knowledge. In the past, people used to pose philosophical questions about how trees grow, or why they grow, or why it rains, or why people die, and what happens when you die. All these, gods and religions and myths and stories and fantasies. That was all a part of philosophy. But the fact is, once we developed the scientific method, we actually got a way of finding things out that reflected the physical world rather than just reflected what we wanted to be true. Yeah, it was the only way we found of putting our biases to one side, because now it didn't matter what we wanted the answer to be. We would conduct experiments to ask the universe, and it would tell us what's going on, and according to how reliable it was, we could use that as a basis and develop theories and models of the universe. So once I got deeply interested in that, I realized that basically science is the only way we've ever found out anything.
Visiting Speaker's Corner at Hyde Park on a Sunday afternoon will provide a brief snapshot of the various different ideas and opinions that are out there. I bumped into an ex-Muslim. He had studied philosophy and the scientific method. He had some of the most coherent, well-researched opinions. He was also very articulate in his speech. As he highlighted, he had questions about reality and our origin. Everyone at some point will have similar questions. It's natural. In fact, the Quran frequently prompts mankind to take time to ponder about oneself and the world around us. What is key is that in this day and age, the age of the internet, these questions are being compounded by the thousands of different opinions that are out there. Not always, but many a time, opinions with an agenda. On the whole, this is of course a good thing, but at the same time, these opinions pose a challenge to our communities, a challenge that was not necessarily there in previous generations.
Access to information has increased exponentially. Youngsters now, can get access to anything, not just information that is for public consumption, but specialized knowledge. So for instance, if you are curious about something today, you would go online and you would get a pretty comprehensive article. And you would be able to speak to a specialist and fool him even in thinking that you know about what you're talking about by just looking at maybe half a dozen websites.
The internet has had a huge impact on people's views of an understanding of how other people are thinking. Whereas in the past, pre-internet days, you were very much living in your own sort of closed circle of people, and now you can see people's views worldwide. So that must be having an impact. It must be having an impact on all religions, because their views are being exposed to potentially worldwide criticism.
When you're in a world where there's a lot of information, people think about things a lot more. They have a lot more alternative views. So if you're growing up with a monocultural background, then it's just natural that, if you're in if you're in Saudi Arabia, everyone will say they're a Muslim, because that's just the way it is culturally. Here, that cultural norm has begun to break down, and people have been thinking. So I'd say we're a post-Christian society. But I think that's the main reason. People are thinking for themselves, and some are saying, well, I just don't believe it. And they're challenging what they've been told. And if they don't get the right answers, then they move away from it.
The new generation of people are now relatively well informed. And it is not possible to say something and have the sole voice on it. There are alternative media streams on everything. A child, a youngster, a youth is exposed to so many different ways of thinking that you can no longer expect him to stay loyal to what you are trying to impart to him. And he will challenge you as well sometimes and say, I don't think you've thought about what you believe in.
While our increasingly atheistic society poses a threat to religious beliefs and ideals, it is also an opportunity for theists of all kinds to embrace this challenge, to test their faith, their ideals and convictions. Some may say theist communities have regressed in their complacency, taking their faith for granted. Now, however, they must embrace the tide of atheism and put their faith to the test. Does it stand up to the scrutiny it is likely to face in the real world?
My mum said this to me one time, being in a society like this helps you really understand, ground yourself, making yourself stronger. So it gives you the ability to kind of have your own battle with non-religiosity. So from that perspective, it's good than just being lackadaisical. If you're living in a Muslim country, sometimes that can be it can give you a lackadaisical approach, which doesn't give you that kind of passion for religion that would otherwise be the case had you been engaging with opponents or detractors. You see what I'm saying? I think secularism has brought about some things which actually religious people can benefit from, as well as things which are against the conservative values of, like, let's say, religious people. Yeah? So it's been a kind of like a double-edged sword. On the one hand, we have been able to become more, let's just say, religiously, as Muslims, let's say, we've been able to be more loud, we can talk more, we can engage more. Because now the liberal philosophy has taken over, which is really the idea of you can do anything else, do what you want as long as you don't harm anyone else. That's the good that's come out of it from our perspective. But at the same time, obviously, like, if you're trying to cling on to like conservative religious values, it becomes more difficult to do so in the context of, let's say, growing promiscuity, growing messing around, all these kind of things. So yeah, that's something that we have to kind of balance.
There is an increase in secular mentality, especially in this country, and that makes it harder for practicing individuals to practice their religion, and it makes it easier for them to sort of not wear their beliefs on their sleeves and just go under the radar. That's not helpful to any religious tradition, because then what happens is it adds to this idea that the religion has disappeared in community, whereas it may well exist, much more than we would like to admit. There are very subtle ways, especially in England, for example, France, where you think about a talk show, LBC or whatever it is. I don't know if you can take these names. But anyway, think of a talk show. You want a radio talk show, you want to phone in, right? You want to phone in, chances are the moment you bring God into the equation, you'll be dismissed. And we're not talking about that. Let's leave that out of the equation. The Prime Minister here, when he sort of used the word God once, Tony Blair, it was a big issue. That how dare he mention that it was, he looked into himself and thought about God as well before he took a particular action abroad, and so on. Also, we find that there is a unique problem in terms of Islam, in the sense that there is hostility to Islam and Islamic ideas in the press, in the media, and so on. And although there are organizations now who would pull them up, they are few. And chances are somebody could make a derogatory comment about a Muslim or Islam and get away with it, whereas they wouldn't be able to do it, say, with Christianity or certainly Judaism. So society doesn't always help, makes it harder, and it's increasing.
While secularism has given Muslims and people of all faiths the freedom to practice their religion freely and equally, the state-sanctioned separation is often seen as a demotion of religion. That may be because religion has enjoyed a certain level of privilege over the years in this country, and now that privilege is no longer there. However, the example given where Tony Blair was criticized for referring to his beliefs is not a unique one. There are numerous examples where it seems as though there is a concerted effort by the media, by the establishment, to frame religion as bigoted and backward, and in particular the religion of Islam. You'll note that before his imprisonment, Anjem Choudhury, the radical extremist, was a regular favorite, always given airtime on the BBC and other mainstream platforms. They loved to give airtime to his Sikh ideology because it fitted with the narrative to demonize religion, as well as Islam, all in one go. Calls from the wider Muslim community to stop giving him a platform would fall on deaf ears. Further proof of this anti-religious bias was seen in the recent general election. Tim Farron, the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, was hounded by the media for his Christianity. They berated him for believing in traditional Christian values regarding homosexuality, opinions he had never shared publicly, and when it came to voting on LGBT issues, he had a track record consistently in favor of LGBT rights. Nevertheless, he was made to seem guilty for subscribing to his Christian faith. He subsequently quit as the leader of the party because he felt he couldn't maintain his faith as well as his position under continuous media scrutiny. Similarly, after the election and the hung parliament was declared, Theresa May indicated a coalition or a deal with the DUP, the Democratic Unionist Party. Almost instantly, the media turned its focus on the theology of the DUP, labeling them creationists, as if believing in intelligent design is akin to a crime. I'd understand if the DUP manifesto was calling for a privilege for Christianity or a peership for their priests, but nothing of the sort. Rather, just subscribing to Christian beliefs was enough to label them backward, bigoted, and unfit for office. This kind of anti-religion is all over our media.
I cannot get behind some supreme being who weighs in on the Tony Awards while 1 million people get whacked with machetes. I don't believe 1 billion Indians are going to hell. I don't think we get cancer to learn life lessons. And I don't believe that people die young because God needs another angel. I think it's just bullshit. And on some level, I think we all know that. I mean, don't you?
The angel thing does seem kind of desperate.
Thought you was a Christian.
I am, but I got some questions.
Give me that. Remember, you don't fix the Bible.
It's broken. It doesn't make sense.
My chief of staff, Leo McGarry, insists on working on the Sabbath. Exodus 35:2 clearly says he should be put to death. Am I morally obligated to kill him myself, or is it okay to call the police? Does the whole town really have to be together to stone my brother John for planting different crops side by side? Can I burn my mother in a small family gathering for wearing garments made from 2 different threads? Think about those questions, would you?
In the year 2057, a team of astronauts are sent on a mission to reignite the dying sun with a nuclear fission bomb before humanity goes extinct. We learned that the first team of astronauts sent on the mission didn't just get lost. Their mission was sabotaged by one of their own crew members who thinks that humanity's extinction is part of God's plan, and he plots to kill them all.
You have killed God.
Or, to put it another way...
And I, for one, say good riddance to the vindictive old bugger.
Charles. Oh, no, I'm fine. Thomas, please.
Yes, I quite understand. It is time to write your book. Strike hard and fast with a blow that is utterly conclusive.
Really, sir? You talk as if we're at war.
Yes. Science is at war with religion, and when we win, we'll finally be rid of those damned archbishops and their threats of eternal punishment.
But they end up being kidnapped by the fundamentalist Christian cult, the 5 Points Trinity Church.
Jim, head home. All right, get that oven.
What is interesting here, actually, is we've got people from different faiths and who all believe in some kind of heaven in a different sense. But every single one of them believes in this heaven on the basis of faith. And faith, by definition, is believing in things without evidence. And personally, I don't do that because I'm not an idiot.
Whoa!
The liberal atheistic pressures of society and the media, coupled with the thousands of different opinions and challenges, serve only to compound the difficulty theists are facing. It is therefore no surprise people are leaving religion altogether. Again, this is not about wishing things were different or longing for a time of ignorance and complacency. Absolutely not. This is about highlighting the challenges that our theist communities are facing today. Are we switched on? Are we aware that Muslims are abandoning their faith? What support is out there for Muslims questioning their faith while they're being bombarded by continuous anti-religious sentiment? To what extent are wider communities and their leaders aware that this is happening?
I've had one case where a person came to me and they were a Shia from a Shia family, and they said that they have lost faith in the ability of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam to answer questions, and they feel that the answers they give are no longer, strong enough, are good enough. They may satisfy a very simple questioner, but not. And I obviously tried to find out more and talk to him about some specific things, and I showed him what I could, that he hadn't seen the whole picture, that the Imams had this habit of looking at a person, seeing who it is, and answering accordingly. I mean, they're not going to give out everything that they have if it's not necessary. And there's wisdom in this. And they themselves say we speak to people according to their ability. Now, unfortunately, when you look at the hadiths, all of these have been collected together without, say, necessarily grading them, right? So you've got an answer that Imam may give a farmer. You've got the answer Imam may give a philosopher. You got an answer Imam may give a non-Muslim. And they all merge together, and obviously they are different. What was interesting was that at that point in life, he was not willing, it seemed, to understand. So he was attending a class I was running on the life of the Imams, and he made this comment. Subsequently, he wasn't coming to the classes.
If you bring people up and force them to believe something, they have no choice. Yeah? If you bring people up and don't force them to believe a particular thing, and they do actually have a choice, why are you surprised if they don't all choose something just because you were forced? Yeah? The younger generation of people in this country, for example, are being brought up with a much more relaxed attitude around religion. There are some people who are extremists, but I would say the majority of people are a bit more relaxed about religion overall.
In another case, which is an ongoing case, we found that a young man came to me, and his father came to me and said that my son has announced that he is no longer going to be praying. He's about 19-year-old. And of course it caused a great shock to the family, who was a religious family. So I called the young man. Well, the father asked me to speak with him. I spoke with him. And he said, the kind of normal things that people who are trying to look at religion from a philosophical and intellectual perspective. He says, well, God is great, and surely he would not punish someone if they didn't pray to him, because that's not the kind of God I believe in. This is more like the behavior of a narrow-minded king who says, you're not bowing down to me, I'm going to punish you. God is greater than this. So I believe I should turn to God when I need him. And I said to him, as one does, I said, do you actually feel you don't need him at certain times? Don't you realize that you're constantly in need of God's grace? And that the prayer is not for God. The prayer is for you to grow and to acknowledge that neediness and so on. That's an ongoing thing. We're going in circles. Again, here, my assessment of it is that we had a relatively intelligent young man whose parents were not talking with him. And they were not realizing that he's beginning to drift and he has questions. I think it's very important to keep checking with our youngsters that, look, hey, is there something on your mind? Because you know what, Islam's got the broad shoulders to handle it. We will be able to find answers to this. Don't let it fester, right? Don't make opinions on it. Come back to us. So this is something that parents need to be very aware of, because a lot of parents will come when, if you like, the horse has bolted, and then they want to try to shut the door of the barn. It doesn't work like that.
The sooner we can begin these conversations, the better for us all. We have to acknowledge from the outset that society is geared up towards atheism. The pressures to conform are obvious, whether it's the media or the way in which certain theories are taught at school and university. There is no escaping it. We have to embrace it and begin these conversations. The sooner we are able to challenge our faith, the stronger it will become. In our 5 daily prayers, we testify that there is no God but Allah and that Muhammad is the messenger of God on 9 separate occasions. These aren't merely words to be repeated arbitrarily. There is a reason for these statements. We must ask why we are making such statements. What are the proofs in light of the society that we are living in? We have to challenge ourselves, and 9 times out of 10 there will be doubts or elements of our faith we aren't sure about, things we can't fully comprehend. But that's not a problem, it's natural.
Doubt is a natural thing. In fact, Allama Tabatabai says that any thinking human being will arrive at doubt often in his life, and that is a sign that is a healthy sign. Now, when doubt comes to somebody, there are several things they can do. Sometimes there is a sense, as you said, of guilt. How can I doubt this? It's wrong. So they brush it under the carpet. That's not going to get rid of the problem. The doubt will, at worst, come back again at a time which will be more serious. But another serious consequence of ignoring doubts is that it dilutes your behavior and your actions. So when you are acting for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala based on dubious foundations, it's going to color the kind of nature of your act, the sincerity of it, the heart you put in it. However, if you do something with conviction, with confidence, again, it has an effect on the way you act. So doubt should not be ignored. You shouldn't feel embarrassed or ashamed. Everybody goes through doubts. Rather, immediately a doubt occurs, a thinking person's response would be to try to resolve that doubt by either finding out an answer, by talking to a scholar, or by another means in which to resolve the doubt.
Doubt in religion is a natural thing. It's part of our faith and our growth. Islam also candidly talks about different levels of faith, from acceptance to belief and uncertainty, which is held as one of the highest stations. Our relationship with faith is not binary between belief and non-belief. It's a journey. Anyone going through questions of faith should not fret, rather seek to find their beliefs with the best of intention. Nevertheless, there are a few common questions that often trouble people of faith and non-faith. These range from the theory of evolution, the problem of evil, the origin of the universe, and many more. There are numerous opinions when it comes to these topics. We'll focus on some opinions and begin our discussion on the origin of everything. Theists will often cite the cosmological argument.
The cosmological argument says that this universe started at a certain time, so for example the Big Bang, and everything has a cause, and that cause must have been something outside the universe that had just started in the Big Bang, and therefore that cause is God. Then that begs the question, well, does everything in the universe have a cause? And if the answer to that is yes, everything does, must have a cause, including the universe, then one obviously can ask, well, what is the cause of the omnipotent creator?
This question has been debated for centuries. If everything around us has a cause, and science has proven that the observable universe certainly had a beginning, then what was its cause? And then, by extension, what was the cause of that cause, and so on. There are various steps to this discussion. The first one is to accept that the universe couldn't have come from nothing.
Something coming from nothing. I mean, I agree that it's not really intuitive to think of something coming from nothing. If there ever was a state of nothingness, yeah, my logic tells me then that state would have stayed like that forever, because there's nothing to cause a change. Yeah. Now, the fact that we have something implies to me that maybe this universe did exist forever, or maybe something did exist forever. The first law of thermodynamics, that energy and matter cannot be created nor destroyed, that supports that. So it could well be that the universe has existed forever, or maybe something has existed forever. That seems much more reasonable to me than to think that it all came out of a zero energy state of nothingness.
Recently, Lawrence Krauss has published a book called A Universe from Nothing, in which he argues that indeed the universe did come from what we would term as nothing. But of course that begs the question, what do we really mean by nothing? So if you have a vacuum energy, if you have the vacuum, we know that all of space is permeated by the Higgs field, and that of course has energy. And so so nothing really isn't nothing.
The fundamental question underneath that is, why is there something rather than nothing, is a very profound question. And you know, even I went to a lecture by Lawrence Krauss the other day, and he will say, you know, we now know that universes, he's a physicist, can pop out of quantum fluctuations, and you know, the universe just happens, and it wasn't there before, and you know, all this stuff. But if he says, if you ask me why are the quantum fluctuations, you know, he said the answer is nobody knows. So you know, and I think that's fine.
With quantum mechanics, the idea of quantum fluctuations just appearing out of the energy of the vacuum might suggest that indeed you could indeed get matter from the vacuum.
As highlighted, it's both rationally and scientifically impossible that something can come from nothing. Even Lawrence Krauss, the leading cosmologist who authored A Universe from Nothing, suggests that particles in the quantum level are able to appear randomly inside a vacuum, and by extension the Higgs field, which gives particles their mass. To cut the long story short, based on this theory, we still need the existence of the Higgs field or a vacuum of energy in which particles can appear at the quantum level. Therefore, something coming from something. What's to say that vacuum of energy is not God? Theists can call it God, while others like Lawrence Krauss can refer to him or it as a vacuum of energy. There's absolutely no contradiction here.
The point is that science doesn't know how the universe came about. But there are many theories. None has been proven, as it were, as being, oh, this is how the universe started. But over the last 20 years, we're getting more and more theories about how the universe could have started, and maybe a bit more evidence that, that suggests that some theories are better than other theories. But it's never 100% proven.
Probably the three famous cosmologists, including Stephen Hawking, Alan Guth, Sean Carroll, and Roger Penrose, they all say that according to the scientific evidence, it looks like the universe had a beginning, but that's based on the inference of extrapolating the expansion of the universe backwards, and getting to 14 billion years ago to a central point. Now, a lot of that is inference. We can't actually rewind the clock and look, so it's just based on inference. But the three of them, and Stephen Hawking says, my personal opinion is that because something couldn't come out of nothing, we think it's much more likely that something must have existed forever. Now, it could be the universe explodes, and then 50 billion years later it contracts, or maybe it just explodes and then keeps exploding, and then explodes here again, and another universe. We don't know. But where we don't know, we admit we don't know.
Another approach is to say that, well, okay, yes, the Big Bang did occur. We know from cosmic microwave background radiation, we know really from the ratio of the elements in the universe, that, and indeed from the fact that galaxies are travelling away from us faster and faster. All these indicate that indeed the universe did occur in a Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. But now there are many theories by physicists that say, well, maybe the universe indeed is eternal, and that the Big Bang arose from a quantum fluctuation in an empty and eternal past universe. So this is a theory that Professor Carroll has recently published. And there are a number of other theories that suggest the universe is eternal. For example, Stephen Hawking and Jim Hartle back in the 1980s came up with the no boundary theory of the universe, and that actually implies that the universe is eternal. And by eternal, I mean eternal both in the past and for the future.
Again, we see no contradiction between the way Allah is described in the Quran and the idea of an eternal existence or universe, if we wish to use the term as postulated by the likes of Stephen Hawking. We often read in scripture that Allah is the first and the last. He has no beginning and no end. This sits perfectly with the no boundary theory, as was indicated by the brother in Hyde Park, when he said something must have existed forever. Again, absolutely no contradiction. It also addresses the question that's posed. If the universe had a creator or a cause, then what was the cause of that? The most rational approach to this question is to look at the characteristics of the universe to infer the characteristics of the cause. For example, let's look at time. As we infer, time had to have had a cause and began at the beginning of the universe. One can then infer that whatever brought time into existence is not limited or bound by time. The cause of time must be timeless. Another example is space, a basic characteristic of our universe. Whatever is the cause of space cannot be bound by space. Whatever is the cause of time and space is timeless and spaceless, and is therefore by definition eternal. This is why Imam Ali says, if you think you can point to God, you have limited him. He is timeless and spaceless. Therefore, the question, what caused the cause of the universe, ultimately puts the cause of the universe inside the limitations and the rules of the universe. The same rules that came into existence at the Big Bang. This is impossible. To provide a tangible example, consider a video game designer. The game is based inside a house. The house is on fire, and the character in the game has 5 minutes to escape the house. Those are the boundaries or the limitations of the game. However, the designer of the game is not limited to that house inside that game. He can travel anywhere around the world. He is not bound by the space of that house in that game. Likewise, the 5-minute limit. He is not limited to that 5 minutes. He can play the game over and over, and he can also make the game last 10 minutes, or he can make it last 1 minute. He is outside the rules of that game. Similarly, the creator or the cause of the universe is outside the characteristics of the universe, namely the cause and effect, space-time limitations of the universe, and is therefore by definition eternal. A being or an entity that is eternal cannot have a cause, cannot have a beginning, cannot have an end. It is for this reason that scientists like Stephen Hawking are now suggesting the universe may be eternal. Again, while some may choose to describe this eternity as the universe, these are just some opinions held by theists, and there are various different opinions. The same can be said about the Darwinian theory of evolution by natural selection. Very briefly, the theory suggests that all living creatures have a common ancestor, and species have evolved through natural selection and mutations in DNA. Evidence for this theory is found in fossils that are millions of years old and in changes of environment where species adapt through natural selection. The mutations in DNA are seen in subsequent generations of species.
According to every single experiment ever done, according to every single piece of knowledge we have about every living creature that's ever been discovered or known or even looked at, or even a tiny piece of bit of it found, supports the theory of evolution. Until we find a single piece of evidence that contradicts the theory of evolution, why should we not go with it? It helps us to combat diseases. It helps us to live twice as long as we used to 50 years ago. It helps us to fix parts of our bodies that get damaged and injured and chopped off and stuff. Yeah, why shouldn't we use it on the basis of it being a fact? Because it does, on practical terms, they operate as a fact. We can rely on it as much as a fact. So
everything in science is developing the whole time, and it's possible for any theory to be overturned given new evidence. But when one looks at the strength of the evidence for evolution by natural selection, I think, in my view, it's very unlikely that it will be overturned. There will be, of course, changes to the details of it, but I think the overall theory, it's now stood the test of time of 150 years, and as we get more molecular data, it becomes strengthened rather than weakened on balance. But it's not 100% certain, because nothing in science is 100% certain.
We say we have no problem with evolution as such, in the sense that we have certain caveats to it, with certain qualifying ideas to it, but we don't have a problem with evolution as long as we accept God is at the head of that there is a system that God created. We know that the Quran alludes to the fact that creation happened in stages. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose it that way. And these stages or days are certainly not 24 hours. So there could be this prolonged period where something evolves into something else.
Once you start talking about this area, the figure that always comes up is Richard Dawkins as a name. But even he, who's quite a hardline atheist, much more hardline than I am, even he would say, as a scientist, if there's a scale of, he came up with a scale of 1 to 7, where 1 is committed religious person who knows that God exists and is absolutely certain about that, and a 7 is, you know, a total atheist who knows with equal conviction that God doesn't exist. He's not a 7. He's a 6.9, because he says, as a scientist, you've always got to say, if new evidence comes along, you change your mind.
The theory of evolution has caused a number of theists to question their faith, including Muslims. However, as Sheikh Abbas mentioned, Islam is not at odds with the idea. There are no traditions or scriptural elements that suggest evolution is false or that creation was instantaneous. On the contrary, in chapter 7, verse 54 of the Quran, we read, "Indeed, your Lord is Allah, who created the heavens and the earth in 6 days." In chapter 22, verse 47, it says, "Verily a day in the sight of your Lord is like 1,000 years of those which you count." And chapter 70, verse 4, "The angels and the Spirit will ascend to him during a day, the extent of which is 50,000 years." Both verses indicate the word day to mean a period of time, that A is not a day in the way we use the word, and B refers to a long, undefined period of time. We have 1,000 years and 50,000 years, both being described as a day. Scholars of the Quran have concluded that the 6 days in the Quran refers to 6 separate periods. Another interesting theory with regards to human evolution is found in chapter 2, verse 30, when your Lord said to the angels, "Indeed, I will make upon the earth a successive authority." They said, "Will you place on it one who causes corruption, and therein sheds blood, while we declare your praise and sanctity?" Allah replied, "Indeed, I know that which you do not know." Now, I stress this is just a theory, and there are various interpretations, and nothing is definitive. But based on this verse, it may have been that a primitive ancestor of the human was already on earth, who the angels had seen causing corruption and bloodshed, and Adam was sent as the first modern Homo sapien or human. It's just a theory, but the point being made is that the earth was inhabited well before the likes of Adam and Eve. Again, this does not contradict any evolutionary theory through natural selection. Ultimately, we see a harmony of thought between the Islamic and evolutionary models when it comes to creation. What's more, having spoken with our guests from the atheist and scientific community, I find that their approach to such theories underlines a refreshing humility and honesty. They are very clear that the scientific method has not got all the answers, and there remains room for development and correction at every stage. That then brings me back to my initial point, where society, the media, and even our education system has become increasingly aggressive in its anti-religious direction, relying on these scientific theories as though they are complete and all-encompassing, literally taken as gospel, while the scientists themselves are the first to admit there is a lot of room for development and correction.
I don't think science knows how the universe came about. We don't know how life came about. We don't really understand quantum mechanics. We don't understand, we understand quantum mechanics and standard particle theory and gravity at the level of our world. We know that, but we don't understand how gravity and quantum mechanics gel together when you look at the universe. Okay, and that would, if we did, it would probably be some sort of quantum gravity theory, which we don't have at the moment. And so we don't have a theory of everything. So we don't understand the underlying nature of reality.
Now, the things that we are taught at school, they may or may not be facts. As my brother here said, we might never know anything for certain. But what we can do is work tentatively and build models of how the world works and use that to predict and control future behavior. And as long as it works, we're on the right track. If in the future we somehow overturn it all, that's irrelevant.
There are many things that the scientific method cannot explain, and maybe reason is an overarching worldview, and part of that reason worldview is the scientific method, but it doesn't explain everything. Yeah, it doesn't explain everything.
I think what's going to happen is that those things that are taken as truth or facts will come under increasing scrutiny. Already now, again, as a consequence of information being widely available, these debates between creationists and evolutionists are online. Some very, very famous debates between them and their arguments. In a sense, most of these arguments, there's nothing new that comes out now. In fact, over the years, these issues have been debated, and they've reached, if you like, a standoff. Neither can convince the other one, because I believe, and this is my personal belief, that it is not possible to rationally solve these or intellectually solve these conundrums. And the answer sometimes lies within. And sometimes when you have seen arguments from both sides, and really each one has got its point, they cannot convince the other one. You may yourself fall in one category or the other, but you have to admit that I cannot convince this other person. Okay. It may be necessary to move inwards and to look into oneself, because a lot of the truths are coded in our hearts and our souls. And within that we find validation for proofs. Because therein lies the greatest thing that we possess. Our greatest possession is not necessarily our mind, but it is our soul. And the soul is able to define reality in a way that the mind cannot.
Some people say that there's a conflict between science and religion, that you can't be a scientist or scientific and be religious at the same time. And there are some people who think that. And I think that's a very dangerous thing, and it's just not true. And in fact, the theory of black holes, and which now, that's another thing that's started as very theoretical and has become very solid because we've got more and more evidence for it. The person who first came up with that concept and was rather laughed at the time was a guy called Georges Lemaitre, who was a Catholic priest in Belgium.
A lot of scientific ideas are not at odds with Scripture, but Scripture is limited by the kind of terminology it could use to describe reality. We are using a different terminology. There isn't much conflict in Islam with science. In fact, from the earliest days, the Muslim scientists had absolutely no problem in being practicing Muslims, as well as extending the boundaries of science.
Some scientists say that science will eventually be able to give good answers to all the important questions. Now, for example, Sam Harris might say that science can adjudicate on morals and values, but others say that's not possible. Other scientists say that's not really possible. So similarly, how on earth can science look at love? Well, maybe you could look at the brain and look at chemicals in the brain, for example. There may be ways around that, of course. But I don't believe that. I don't believe in scientism. I don't think science has got all the answers or ever will have all the answers. In other words, reason and science are two separate things, perhaps. And certainly emotions are as well, and then morals maybe will never be, the scientific method will never be able to ascertain what is the moral way to behave.
There are numerous elements of our everyday life that are beyond the scope of the scientific method. For example, love, truth, friendship, community, morality, justice. The list goes on. These are all intrinsic, integral elements to our existence that can't necessarily be put under a microscope, despite the efforts of some in the scientific community. While the debate continues, what we are seeing when it comes to the growing levels of atheism is that these immaterial, often virtuous moral traits that theists will point to as evidence for existence of something beyond the empirical world, are in fact becoming a reason for people leaving organized religion. Traits such as morality and justice that are integral to our psyche have become at odds with the often corrupt behavior of religious leaders and religious institutions, ultimately driving people away from religion.
Personally, I mean, I personally think that it probably does have quite a big effect, because if somebody leads by example, it always makes an impact on you. Even if you choose to disagree with them, you will give them respect for saying and behaving in concordance, yeah? You know, not being a hypocrite. So if somebody goes on about how faithful they are, how much belief they have in all this afterlife and higher power, and then they steal, it really doesn't show that much faith in that higher power, does it? It actually shows that I'm out here to get what I can, and that big higher power is not going to do anything to me, or there is no afterlife to worry about, yeah? Whereas if that person was to consistently demonstrate that they can't do these sort of things because of this extra faith they have, and makes them such a better person, of course that would be much more attractive, and the people within the folds of the religion would use that kind of thing and say, you know what, that is a person I could look up to, that's a person I should be like, and people could show their children and say, look, this person is respectable, you should be more like that, and then if it turns out that they're actually the opposite, all the kids are going to be like, well, you've been sold a dream, you know, but they feel really let down, and they think, you know what, everybody else is out there pretending and just getting money, at least I won't be that bad, I'll just choose not to be religious. That'll be nowhere near as bad as these fakes who use the religion for personal gain. They're the worst, you know, absolute worst, you know, and whereas these, the normal person would say, you know what, I just won't want nothing to do with it, because I can't trust anybody there anyway, so I might as well turn my back on it, and I'll just be a good person. They are still much better than the hypocrites, if you know what I mean. So it's because they're given that image of the religion, for example, it has a very negative effect. And to be honest with you, I saw that sort of stuff my whole life. I grew up going to mosque 2 hours a day, 7 days a week for nearly 10 years. And exactly what you said, all sorts of corruption. The manager of the mosque used to drive a brand new car every year. We used to use Qaeda and Quran from years and years ago, sellotape together, and you know, three put together. You don't want to know about it. Yeah. Even the sticks they beat us with, didn't even hurt anymore because they were so rubbish.
The other thing, of course, that's had a big effect is where institutions have not behaved in a good way. And obviously the Catholic Church has had a huge problem with child abuse. You know, that's had a massive effect if you go to Ireland. And I think the Church of England, I know somebody who's a sociologist of religion, I've heard her speak, Professor Linda Woodhead, has a very strong view about this, which is the Church of England's decline is because it's failed to adapt to changes in social norms, and other churches in other countries have kept up with that.
Well, religion has become more polarised, with moderates perhaps pulling away from the organised religion because of religious extremists. For example, that might be one reason why. You know, it might be because you had paedophile Catholic priests or whatever.
It's an unfortunate truth that Islam is one thing, Muslims are one thing. The Christian teachings are one thing, Christian clergy is one thing. And the same with the Jews. The Quran actually blames the Jews for their, the rabbis for distorting the nur that was given to Musa alayhi salam and deceiving the people. It is my personal belief that the reason why the Quran continually talks about the Jews and where they went wrong is because there are some similarities between what the Muslims feel about themselves and what the Jews felt about themselves, that the Muslims feel they are on the correct path. So did the Jews. But that did not mean that they were loyal to the traditions that they were given. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is warning us, right, that don't fall into this trap. That I have given you something beautiful and you have then used it, if you like, to further your egotistic and further your own human frailties, but now in the name of religion. So when people observe this, they're unhappy, they're confused, there's a feeling of, they're upset actually. So there is always going to be a challenge there. And unfortunately religion, Islam is no exception, but religion has been a vehicle for people to further their own ambitions. This is something that has been there throughout history, not just modern history, but even in ancient times.
This corruption of faith is found in every religion, where personal gain, ambition, even lust is put before the tenets of faith or the religious congregation. That intrinsic moral outlook that we all share sees this as nothing less than hypocrisy. When the ones preaching morality are then found to be pedophiles, or thieves, or being bought by the political class to preach a puritanical, extremist version of the religion, brainwashing people for political gain. It's no surprise then when so many people leave religion when they see the religious betray their trust. The responsibility upon the religious authorities can never be underestimated, now more than ever, as people are choosing to leave religion. In a similar vein, that moral compass that we share, which we use to hold religious authority to account, that same mentality brings about another fundamental question that has spread an atheistic outlook throughout the world, and that's the problem of evil. How can a loving God allow evil and suffering to take place when he has the ability to stop the suffering? The answers to this question are varied and don't necessarily convince everyone. Firstly, one must ask whether the suffering is because of God or because of man. The natural resources on this planet are enough to provide for everyone. However, the allocation of these resources are often corrupt and driven by greed. The Thomson Reuters Foundation, a Swedish-based think tank, has found that just 10% of the world's military budget could end extreme poverty as we know it. Similarly, a waste and recycling body in the UK has found that in 2015, the UK threw away 4.4 million tons of edible food. The total estimated cost of that is £13 billion. In the US, an estimated half of produce is destroyed before it even reaches consumers because of cosmetic reason. That's a total of $118 billion. This is edible, healthy food destroyed because it doesn't look completely perfect. Imagine the sum total of such waste throughout the world, and very quickly we see that much of the suffering, or at least the poverty, is due to our own decisions. This is compounded further when we consider war, imperialism, colonialism, conflict, racism, and discrimination. These are all man-made causes for evil and suffering. Mr. M. Basuni authored a paper titled Searching for Peace and Achieving Justice, published in the Journal of Law and Contemporary Problems. In it, he looks at every single conflict since the beginning of the 20th century, citing official statistics. He found that there has been around 203 million deaths as a result of man-made conflict. 203 million. In that same period of time, the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology estimates that there has been 8 million deaths due to natural disasters. Quite clearly, the majority of suffering we see is due to decisions made by men and not natural causes. The discussion doesn't end there, as people often suggest that a moral God should intervene in all cases of suffering. Well, firstly, a decision to intervene or not does not prove that there is no God. It just proves we don't understand his choice to intervene or not. Secondly, the Quran describes this life as a test, and just like a good and kind teacher would not intervene in a student's exams, God also refrains from intervening. There are numerous arguments back and forth with regards to the problem of evil. Some center around the illusion that we are independent, when in fact we were brought into existence without a choice. We didn't choose our gender, ethnicity, our IQ, where we were born, the family we were born into, how we look, how our body functions, and the list goes on. Whatever did bring us into existence made these choices, and ultimately if they choose that my existence is brought to an end naturally or through cancer or a natural disaster, it's up to them. The illusion of evil is because we believe we have a choice or an authority over ourselves. However, consider an inventor who creates a device. It's up to the inventor to do what he wishes with that device, to cherish it or discard it. It's up to the inventor. There's nothing evil about it. Whatever God chooses, it's his decision. He owns what he has created. Furthermore, consider the tsunami of 2009. Nearly 250,000 people had died. On the surface, it seems evil. But how do we know? Maybe those individuals were taken to the hereafter and prefer their new abode. And if given the chance to return to Southeast Asia, they may refuse. In that light, they have been blessed. The point here is that the evil is subjective. What may be evil to one person may be a blessing for someone else. Consider a child being immunized. They feel pain and suffer. To them, the immunization is a great evil. But in fact, they are unaware that the procedure is beneficial. Finally, remaining with the topic of the tsunami, the natural disaster provided millions of people across the world the opportunity to come to the aid of the victims, to help and to assist, to bring people together, to carry out beautiful deeds of kindness and selflessness. So we see in the midst of apparent disaster the opportunity for compassion and love. These are just some thoughts, and in this regard there are plenty of published discussions in further detail. The point ultimately is that we are living in a time and a society where religion in general is under greater pressure than ever before. There is no insulation against it, rather our focus must be on engaging with the reality of society around us. The media, the aggressive demonization of religion, the privilege of atheistic ideals, the dogmatic way certain theories are approached, the kind of dogma you don't even find in the scientific community itself, the godless ideologies that are seeping into our homes, they need to be recognized for what they are. We need to be aware. We need to begin these vital conversations. We need to test our faith, speak out if we have doubts, consult one another. As community leaders, we need to facilitate a strategy for a new approach because people are leaving Islam. Atheism is everywhere. If we ignore it, then we run the risk of being caught flat-footed, wondering how we reach such a godless, empty space. There is time, and there is still a lot of passion within our communities. But just as society changes, we must also be willing to change.